Caleb Johnson may be headed toward an unexpected banner season, but will the defense be headed toward an expected banner season as Big Ten play begins? Welcome into Hawkeyes Live right here at the Voice of College Football. Appreciate you stopping by. Leave those comments and questions there in the chat. Consider the Super Chat contribution. We got Corey Brada here, of course. He makes the show go for 164 consecutive times. Catch Corey on From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Corey, how you doing today?
Doing all right.
Good.
Doing okay. Yeah. This is a big week for Iowa. I mean, the weekend was sort of, I know people last week were like almost indifferent to the game, which is kind of crazy to me 3 weeks in, but I get it. Losing to Iowa State just sucks. I mean, that team, and I don't care what Levi Stevenson says, I don't think Iowa State's any better than Iowa. I mean, I think Iowa dominated that first half, gave up a couple of big plays, but that's football, right? Like, not to sound like Kirk Ferentz or Brian Ferentz, that's football. Things you give up a couple of big plays and very unorthodox nature, you lose. And margin for error is much smaller when you have an Iowa offense that still is an Iowa offense. I mean, the numbers say it's much improved through 3 weeks. Now we'll see once they, up against better competition. This Minnesota team is surprisingly good defensively. Now, they haven't played a great schedule, but the numbers say they're one of the best defensive teams in the country. My guess is that they're not top 5. They're number 2 in team defensive passing efficiency. That's impressive. They're top 20 in total rush defense. I believe they're top 5 in total defense. This is going to be a real challenge. First road game of the year, rivalry, night game, national TV. This is going to be a fun game. It's a big game where it's placed in the schedule is meaningful. There's so many things to watch. So I know as the winner fan in me, I'm not over the Iowa State loss because I hate losing that game. I think Iowa State's got a chance to have a pretty good season. I thought that preseason. I still think Iowa's a better team. They had no excuse to lose that game, especially when you're up 13-0 at halftime. Should have been 17, should have been 21, but they didn't execute, and it is what it is. They did not execute. And by the way, I saw somebody, I don't even know who it was, somebody posting some content on YouTube about, the Iowa State goal line stand. I think it was in the headlines of the Des Moines Register. The goal line stand. The red zone defense. Did they realize that Jacob Gill was wide freaking open in the corner of the end zone? One of those, I mean, nobody around. That ain't goal line stand. That's called bad offense. It's called a quarterback that didn't know how to look to the left. Don't give yourself credit for everything here, all right? Let's acknowledge the obvious. Anyways, so look, big game, and if they keep winning, that's the only way to kind of get rid of the bad taste from the Iowa State loss. Because if they lose, if they end up going 9-3 this year, which will take them out of the playoff conversation and will likely mean they will not make the Big Ten championship game, because that would mean two losses in the conference, and I don't think that's going to be enough. They go 9-3, go to a bowl game win, okay, 10-3. I still think that's a disappointing season. I just think the goal has to be Big Ten championship / playoff. And I do think they've got a almost as good of a shot of making the Big Ten championship now, because that other loss came in the non-conference. So that just drops down their playoff chances a bit to where I think it's basically even with Big Ten title game chances. So I'm planning my trip to Indy. Mark, what about you?
Well, I know that you've given me a lot to go on here. Let me see. What direction do I go on? I'm not training a trip to Indy. A trip to Indy. Hey, why not? Maybe a trip to Indy.
That was fun. That was fun last year. I mean, the game wasn't fun, but the trip was fun.
Okay. Ohio State, Iowa. Trip to Indy.
Ohio State, Iowa?
Indy? Yeah, I'll meet you in Indy.
All right. That'd be great.
I was going to say that past all the football stuff, which I'm going to get to in just a second, it hit me there as you were somewhat like mockingly and also generically impersonating like whoever from the Des Moines Register or whatever Iowa State fan, that I've been accused of generically impersonating people, just like having a standard voice that is the impersonation voice of any random fill in the blank person.
Well, and I shouldn't have dropped the name Des Moines Register. I don't know if it was the Cyclone Des Moines
Okay.
Register side. It was somebody in the media that, and that's their job. I get it. You're going to hype up Iowa State's goal line defense. Like, give me a break. But hey, I give that kid credit for kicking that 54-yard field goal. Now, we got to move on, right? Iowa played a game Saturday against Troy. And hey, there were ups and downs. They gave up big plays, Iowa did. But here's a stat people need to remember from Saturday's game. And this Don Patterson brought up. We had a 2-part post game over the weekend with Coach Patterson once again. And one of the stats he brought to my attention, which I think is fascinating and I think is very much noteworthy, applicable, and relevant. And that is last year, Iowa was incredible in giving up and not giving up explosive plays, especially super explosive plays in Big Ten conference play. And we know that because these are the analytics, some of the analytics that Coach Patterson tracks for the coaching staff. They gave up 7 explosive plays let me rephrase. They gave up 10 explosive plays over the course of 10 conference games last season, including the Big Ten championship game. Now, that is an insanely good number. In fact, that Penn State game, we remember talking about this. They go on the road, get blown out by Penn State. That defense didn't give up a single explosive play. Now, explosive plays, that's not the only thing you got to do because Iowa's defense struggled at times against Penn State, stopping the run. Penn State moved the chains effectively. But that's hard on an offense. If you can't create an explosive play or two, that's hard. Now, when you're going up against Iowa's offense, you can just milk the cow and eventually she's going to go dry. but anyways.
You just came up with that.
No, well, sort of. But bottom line is last year, 10 explosive plays in 10 conference games. You want to guess how many explosive plays they gave up in the 3 non-conference games, Mark?
7.
You watching the show on Sunday night?
I didn't.
7.
I heard Kirk reference it today.
Oh, did he really? Okay,
he was asked. He might have been asked about it. I wrote it down. Even 7 explosive plays. Yes.
Okay, so I didn't get the press conference completely watched. I'll admit that I watched part of the press conference today. I've not watched it from start to finish. That must have been second half of the press conference. So that's interesting. 7 explosive plays in 3 games, and let's not forget those 3 games last year were against Western Michigan, Utah State, and Iowa State. So they last year gave up explosive plays against inferior competition. What did they do once Big Ten play started? They corrected those mistakes, and they ended up being not just a good explosive play defense, they became the best explosive play defense in the conference. So for people, there were a large faction of people who were sort of in panic mode after Saturday's game. And, the defense is not the same, and they're missing Cooper DeJean so much. And I just said, calm down. I remember last year against Western Michigan, they ended up blowing that team out. It was close at halftime. I remember doing a halftime show because people were freaking out, and they were giving up explosive plays against Western Michigan. So people just need to calm down. Here's what you do, and this is what Phil Parker does. At times, it's a developmental defense. As good as this defense is year in and year out, it's a developmental squad. So there are going to be times early in seasons where you go through some lumps. But here's what Phil Parker is. He's a great football coach. He's a great explosive play coach, and he's a great DBs coach. He will work through these problems and correct them. And the reason I keep bringing up the schedule, why this game is so important, and I talked about it Sunday. You have a game this Sunday, or this Saturday night. You get a bye week. Then you get Ohio State. People expect you to lose to Ohio State anyways. So if we're assuming they lose to Ohio State, and I don't know that we should assume that, but if people want to do that, fine. Then you've got one game between now and the home game against Washington next month, where you have all that time for Phil Parker to work this DB room, which, by the way, consists of 3 guys who competed for one spot opposite Jamari Harris. TJ Hall still listed as the starter at that other corner spot. He will get it figured out. Okay, they're not going to be giving up. I don't even know how many explosive plays they've given up through 3 games, but I have confidence. History says they will figure this out. The difference is this is a short turnaround. It's less than a week to figure it out. And I know that, everybody plays for the most part week after week after week, but Minnesota's offense isn't great. That's to Iowa's advantage. The defense is. My guess is he'll have it figured out mostly this week. And if not this week, then they get a whole bye week and a game against a really explosive Ohio State team to figure it out. But that's a game, again, nobody expects Iowa to win. So if you can at least survive, even if you give up a couple explosive plays this weekend, do what you did against Troy. Survive. Survive. Big win on the schedule, road win. You move to the bye week and really have some time to clean things up.
I'm curious to know because we've got a little bit different of an audience than probably your typical team podcast show. It's a little bit more diverse because of our other channels and because of how we've built this out. What is the percentage possibility that Ohio State or that Iowa beats Ohio State? Just in the chat, just give us a number, 10%, 20%, 80%, whatever you think it is. 2 weeks from now, Iowa at Ohio State, just to churn up some conversation there in the chat. Give us a percentage chance that Iowa wins that game. All right, you've taken off on a few places here, Corey. So I'm going to go back to this Minnesota defense. So they throw back-to-back shutouts. Rhode Island's one of the teams, of course, Nevada. Nevada's considered going into the season one of the worst group of fives. However, they almost pulled off an upset, should have, against SMU in week 0. They outplayed SMU in that game.
And real quick, let me just say this. Nevada tested Troy, and I don't know if that means much. It's hard. Again, we're so early in the season, we're like trying to play the transitive property. Troy got beat by a Memphis team that just beat Florida State. So, we thought, well, Troy's crap because they're 0-2. They lost to Memphis. They lost to Nevada. Well, like you said, Nevada looked decent against SMU, and then Memphis proved to be a pretty good G5 team this past weekend.
And this is an awfully small sample size, but I'm going to throw it out there because you talked about Minnesota's pass defense. So I know next to nothing about Nevada's passing attack. I saw a little bit of the SMU game, don't recollect any of it. And then, of course, we're talking Rhode Island, an FCS team. I'm going to go back to the North Carolina game. Okay, Max Johnson got hurt, so that had to help against the running quarterback, the backup, and who knows how he'll do. North Carolina's 3-0 at this point, and I'm sure he'll get better. Connor Harrell is the backup. But while Max Johnson was in the game, and I'm not confusing Max Johnson with Bryce Young or Trevor Lawrence, he's a quarterback who's thrown 27 touchdowns and 6 picks at LSU against SEC defenses. So he's a good quarterback. They were all over him. They were forcing him to throw the ball away, tight coverage. They played a good pass defense while he was in there. So that'll be an interesting challenge. And we know that Minnesota was one of the best defenses. I'll say that the numbers were skewed because of the bad offenses in the Big Ten West, but they were legitimately excellent defense for a few years running there when they were winning 9, 11 games. And last year, not so much.
Yeah, they kind of dipped. But like you say, that's a deviation from the norm.
Absolutely.
And they've produced good DBs. I haven't studied their roster enough. I know it's been mentioned that Don Patterson mentioned it Saturday. It sounds like the strength is the safety unit, and that's very similar to that's a different defense. It's constructed differently, but it's similar to Iowa State's strength. And of course, Iowa State in the final 3 quarters of that game gave Cade McNamara a lot of problems. And it's an Iowa receiver core that looked pretty good. Now, albeit against Troy this past weekend, but they couldn't get anything going those final 3 quarters. So I would expect, I have no reason to think that if Cade McNamara comes out there and just carves up that Minnesota defense, then I'll be encouraged. I'm not going to sit here and say, well, it's Minnesota. No, I think that this Minnesota defense is legit. It's a legit Power 5 defense. We'll see how good of a Power 5 defense, but it is good.
And while you were looking at the schedule and mentioned the name Washington, I don't think they're a playoff contender or anything like that. They just lost a game this past weekend. However, they've played 3 games. And they're not a bad team by any stretch. They played to the wire against a Washington State team that's 3-0, that was just coming off a 3-touchdown win against Texas Tech. They've blown out their 2.
Well, Texas Tech is horrific.
I don't know if they're horrific.
They lose to Abilene Christian?
Well, they won, but yeah, they barely won.
In double over.
Yeah, like 52-51.
Okay. They may be the worst team in the Big 12, not named Houston, perhaps. Go ahead.
I don't think they will be, but yeah, they're not. I'm not selling them as a great team by any stretch. But Washington State won the game by 3 touchdowns. I'm thinking that Jed Fish is a good coach. Showed that at Arizona and other stops. And they got Will Rogers, one of the most prolific quarterbacks in the history of college football, that they're going to be a capable foe for Iowa to play. I think it's going to be a really good, interesting game. Do we want to get on the topic of Caleb Johnson?
Yeah, I mean, it's why he's the leading rusher in the country now. Yeah.
Yeah, this is amazing. So, wow. The Iowa offense is 18th in the country, 243 rushing yards per game. Caleb Johnson with the team with 3 straight 200-yard games. That hasn't happened since 2013. And of course, yes, he's number 1 in the nation in rushing. I'm grabbing a couple names from your past here, Corey, with Jordan Kenzari. He was the last Iowa rusher with 3 consecutive 100-yard games in 2015. And LaShawn Daniels, the first in that same season, had 3 consecutive 2+ TD games in 2015. And Iowa's in the 50s in total offense. It's only the 3 games, but they're in the 50s in total offense and in scoring offense.
I thought total offense they were in the 60s, but okay. I'll trust
I saw
you.
like 54 and 56.
Okay. Well, Tim Lester wanted to cut those numbers in half. How much do you read into that 3 weeks into the season against inferior competition, but everybody else is playing inferior competition? So how much do you read into those numbers at this point?
Well, I watched the Iowa State game, and that offensive performance went from, a strong rushing attack, a dominant rushing attack for the first half into the third quarter to, I don't want to say non-existent, but they got away from it a little bit. I think they should have stayed with the run a little bit more than they did to, I don't want to put it all on Cade, but I think he was the number 1 factor in their passing struggles in that game.
Who do you think's a better team, Iowa or Iowa State?
Iowa.
Okay. Yeah, I agree. So if they can run the ball from start to finish this season, like they have been, maybe not to the level that they have been against Illinois State and Troy, everybody's numbers are going to go down once they start playing each other. We're talking about Power 5 competition. They're going to be a top 75 to 80 offense. I mean, I would just have a hard time if they're running the ball that effectively, even if the passing game stays the same. Honestly, Mark, it's kind of what I expected. That here we are 3 weeks into the season, and I'm like, this is kind of what I thought would happen. And I'm sure other people did as well. But in a sense, you're kind of going out on a limb preseason saying that because it's been so long since Iowa's had a capable offense. But I've been saying for weeks, the passing attack's going to struggle in September. I think I'm hopefully cautiously optimistic that they will figure it out as we head into October. I'll stand by that. But the passing attack's already better. Now, they've had a little less involvement with tight end play than they should, but having a better quarterback, Cade is a better quarterback than Deacon Hill or than Spencer Petras. Having a better quarterback and having receivers that are catching the ball. Like, that's the thing. And Jacob Gill has been the guy that I expected him to be. Mark, you kind of made fun of me a few weeks ago because I was, Jacob Gill was my guy. And he's been Mr. Consistent so far, and he has been really reliant. And my guess is, even though his numbers have been somewhat modest, I'm guessing he leads any Iowa receiver in the last 4 or 5, at least 4 years through the first 3 weeks of the season, just in catches and yards is my guess, because Iowa's had hardly any production from their wideouts. He has been really good. The only difference is they lost to Iowa State. The only difference is basically everything that could go wrong in that game went wrong. And I'm not making excuses like some other contributors that you have that want to, put their team on a pedestal. But I do think that I was the better team. And had that kid, had Conrady or whatever his name is, missed that 54-yarder, there would be a different tenor across Hawkeye Nation. They just would. It'd be 3-0. We're playoffs. Let's go. They are still in the playoff hunt. I know one loss hurts you, but they're not out of it. But people have this discouraging tone because they found a way to lose a game when they normally find ways to win games.
Yes, you're hitting on a point that I seem to hit on in some fashion from some angle involving different teams or whatever the scenario almost every day on my show. And that's there's a difference between just saying, okay, Iowa State won the game. They should be given full credit. I saw no controversy with the officials, anything like that, fully won the game. Versus we are here to evaluate the play.
Yeah.
That's different than just saying, hey, if we're just going to say win loss, then why are we even here? Just check the score every week and then don't say a word. And yes, if that field goal is missed, that would have had nothing to do with Iowa's playing ability. Nothing. That was just
Correct.
all on the other kicker.
I know.
And Iowa's performance is exactly the same.
Yeah.
And they would be 3-0.
Exactly. And frankly, I mean, I've brought up the number of individual plays in that game that probably would have turned the tide. Like I say, if Cade just looks left on that one trip, I think they win. They'd be up 3 scores at that point. I don't think they're giving up that lead, even with Iowa State's passing attack. But if ands and buts were candies and nuts, right? That's the the juvenile saying. So Iowa State deserved to win. We can say both can be true at the same time. Iowa State deserved to win. I think Iowa's a better team. And that sucks. If we go back later, like if Iowa, here's a scenario that's going to pain a lot of Iowa fans. Mark, if Iowa goes 10-2 and they don't make the Big Ten championship game and they don't make the 12-team playoff, I think that's possible. That could happen. Possible that could happen. I don't know that it's likely, but say they end up 10-2, one loss in the Big Ten, lose out on the championship game due to a tiebreaker scenario, and they don't make the 12-team playoff, that Iowa State loss will hurt so much. Regardless of how they lose that other game, it will just hurt so much because I think we'll all be able to say, hey, if any one of those plays happens or doesn't happen, Iowa's playing in the playoff for the first time. And it may be Iowa's last chance in a while to play for that playoff. They're losing a lot next season. They got a lot of veteran leadership that will be departing.
I hope that with about 3 weeks left in the season, Corey, we are dissecting tie-breaking scenarios. I hope we are going in the rules, going, what if happens if Oregon does this or Ohio State does that, or it creates a 3-way tie or whatever, because if they just lose one game, pick your game. Of course, it would be better if they lost to somebody else who's not involved in the tie-breaking scenario and pulled off the win against Ohio State than, of course, having the head-to-head loss to Ohio State, unless there's some kind of crazy 3-way tie or 4-way tie, something like that. Consider USC doesn't even play Ohio State or Iowa. They could be off, or Iowa. They don't play Iowa, Oregon, or Ohio State. USC could be off doing their own schedule, basically, in a sense, not even kind of in a sense playing in the same conference, come out of it with one loss, and the other 3 have one loss because Ohio State beat Oregon and Iowa beat Ohio State, and you get a 4-way tie. It's a little crazy to think about, but I just drew up a scenario that's not that much of a stretch.
So here's a question for you. And I've had people like email me, DM me, text our call-in line, like asking me, please stop talking about the playoff. It's not happening. And I'm like, these people, just calm down. Like, does it pain you for me to say playoff? Playoff. Oh, stop saying it. Like, who cares? They're not out of the playoff race. If they win every game, they're in, regardless of Big Ten championship game. I believe that. I think if they go 11-1, losing the Big Ten title game, 11-2 gets you in. Okay? With an early season loss against Iowa State and a Big Ten championship loss to the best team in the conference, they're in. Now, here's my next question, Mark. If they, no pun intended, question mark, if they figure out a way to go 10-2, let's assume they lose to Ohio State, but it doesn't really matter. If they go 10-2, are they better off going to the Big Ten championship game or not, as it relates to playoff chances? Some people would say, well, you never want to not go to the Big Ten championship game. But if we're just talking about the playoff, do you think there's a better chance at 10-2 or going to the playoff and rolling the dice?
If the playoff committee is doing its job, then it's better for them to go to the championship game, even if they lose, if they play well. if that committee is doing its job and saying, you know what, we just saw Iowa play, the Big Ten champion is going to be the best, second or third best. They're going to be a top 3 ranked team in the country. They're going to be extremely high. And if Iowa loses 24-20, that's almost a win. That is almost better than almost any win in the country. That sounds kind of strange, but it is. That performance shows that you played, let's say it's Ohio State, Oregon, whomever it is, the number 2 team in the country to an excellent game. And you're going to be punished for that?
Yeah, but my question was not, would you rather go to the championship game and compete?
Okay.
My end is just, would you rather go or not go? Like,
yeah, with the risk
week,
that
risk that you get blown out too.
Yeah.
That's also a possibility. Do you think there's a better chance? Imagine this. Here's how I explain it. If I was 10-2, let's give them 50-50 odds. I know Keith in the chat believes that they don't. Okay, fine. 40-60 odds. However, so if it's 40-60, would you rather take those odds and sit at home and not have to worry about those odds getting worse? Or would you rather go to the championship game and take a shot at 75-25 versus it going to 25-75?
10-2, stay home.
Stay home? Okay.
Yeah.
It's all right. So you think they would be in, or just better odds of that? I think that's fascinating, that conversation.
It is fascinating. I actually predicted, if you look at my season predictions, Iowa to go 10-2 and miss the playoffs.
Yeah, I think you told me that. Well, who did you have them losing to? Did you pick game by game? But
I had them. I basically forecasted a 2-loss Big Ten season.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I did too. I had them at 10-2. I had them losing to Ohio State and Nebraska.
But this raises the scenario, because they lost to Iowa State, which is, of course, not a good thing. But in your scenario, 1 loss in the Big Ten, how many times would a team lose only 1 game and not make the Big Ten championship game?
But there's more teams in this conference, and again,
which makes it even more of an accomplishment.
Yeah, but there's also a possibility there are other teams with 1 loss, is what I'm saying. And if Ohio State goes undefeated.
Yes, to your point, because there are more situations where teams are not playing each other.
I think if they go 10-2, they're likely in the Big Ten championship game. I think you would agree with that.
Exactly. That's what I'm stating.
Yeah. So, that's why I'm bringing this up, because 10-2 and no Big Ten championship game was more likely if they had beaten Iowa State.
Sure.
Because then they, that second loss would have to come against someone in the Big Ten. And hey, how about this? Nebraska looks good. I don't know how for real they are, but that is a good game on the schedule. And as far as when it's played, it's a good time to play that game, because if Nebraska's, say, a top 10, top 15 team at that point, or maybe they're in contention for that other Big Ten championship game spot. No, you're shaking your head.
No, I'm just kind of marveling at the possibilities.
Don't you think that is a great opportunity at a late schedule win on a schedule that has few opportunities at top 25 victories?
What we are starting to discover, and it's a narrow path, but with this spreading out of these schedules, meaning teams not playing each other as frequently because you miss half the conference.
Yeah.
Is that the likelihood of, and the more there's an elite section of the conference, and I'm not going to say there are bad teams in the conference, but I don't think there's many, just a clear separation, that you have 4 teams with 1 loss, 3 teams with 1 loss.
And I'll tell you a team I'm glad is not on the Iowa schedule, and that's Indiana. After what they did to UCLA over the weekend, I don't know how for real they are, but that's kind of a scary thing. Like when you have a new head coach that's winning a bunch, kind of like Northwestern last year. Like Iowa figured out a way to win that game, but I don't know. That's a good James. What's the guy's head? What's his name?
Curt Cignetti.
Yeah, I mean, obviously he's a good coach, right?
Yeah.
The trend at James Madison was impressive, but you expect, especially at a place like Indiana, for that to be a rebuilding process. And who knows? Maybe they'll end up winning 5 games this year. But I think they're on course for a winning season. And I mean, what they did to UCLA over the weekend, that's a place Iowa has to go and play. That game was at the Rose Bowl, wasn't it?
Yes.
That's impressive stuff.
Yeah, it is. Not that UCLA is a good team, but Indiana has stomped 3 marginal to bad teams, and they don't do that
Yeah, but like,
typically.
who'd you have in that game? Did you pick that game?
I did not pick that game. I would have picked Indiana, but nothing
Really?
close to what they did.
Well, what would have made you pick Indiana? I mean, to me, they both lost a lot. They
Yeah.
lost their head coach. They lost their UCLA didn't really lose their quarterback.
UCLA was a much better team last year. Much better team.
And at home, I think I definitely would have taken UCLA in a close one. But the fact that Indiana won and won convincingly is impressive. How many do you know? I'm just curious. Ask this question: how many of the Big Ten contenders have to play Indiana?
I know Ohio State does not. Iowa does not, of course. I don't know. I could go through their schedule. It's right here. Uh, Now, this is not fair, and maybe I shouldn't even bring it up, but since we brought up UCLA, and he's a first-year head coach, even going into that game, one of the big reasons I was picking Indiana, although it was not an official pick of mine, I thought coaching mismatch. I give this Kurt Signetti a lot of credit for what he's done. Deshaun
Yeah.
Foster is just starting at UCLA,
Well,
and until proven otherwise, and until I have another narrative in my brain, Deshaun Foster, the connection is right back to Big Ten media days, and that is completely unfair of me. I get it, but
well, I
that's
mean,
what it
I was
is.
critical of that hire in the offseason. I thought it was an odd hire. And hey, we talk about maximizing the talent on your roster. Good coaches maximize talent on the roster. And I'd like to think we're seeing that a little bit with Iowa, even though the passing game hasn't been great. We've talked about individual spots. You got to give him some credit for the improved rushing attack. I just put a comment in your starred column for you to. Can you read that for me, Mark?
From Dave, our buddy Dave, Minnesota
Dave.
Dave. Are you gonna read my super chats or not? Just pissing money away. All right, Dave. We're a proven commodity here, Dave. And this is coming from Minnesota Dave, who's only been watching us for, I don't know how long Minnesota Dave's been watching me. It's been 5 years or something. Come on, Minnesota Dave. He just called me Saturday night. We had a nice little conversation. He was coming from the Minnesota game. He was all happy. We will get to your super chats, Dave. I was checking out the Indiana schedule. Listen how manageable this sounds. Charlotte, Maryland, at Northwestern, bye week, Nebraska. Wouldn't that be a game if Indiana rolls in there at 6-0 at Nebraska? Oh, hosting Nebraska.
I don't think they'll be 6-0, but go ahead.
Maryland, Northwestern, they trip up once, probably.
Well, Maryland won this weekend against a P5 opponent.
Yeah, they lost to Michigan State as well. Anyway, they've got Nebraska at home and Washington at home. Then they finish up at Michigan State, Michigan, bye week, at Ohio State, Purdue. And since you brought up coaching decisions and so forth, and the Deshaun Foster one, I just left the Steve Dace Michigan podcast and had some things to say about Michigan's hire of Sharon Moore. That is not inconsistent, everyone, with what I said when he actually was hired. So I wasn't just going crazy after 3 games and saying that he shouldn't have been hired, because I said that at the time.
He needs to cry more, Mark. He needs to cry more. Hey, did you see, which was it, that Heavens Twitter account that posted a AI video of Seth Wallace after winning that game without Kirk, and he's bawling.
Oh, yes. I came across that, or you sent it to me, one or the other. Yeah, that was great. Doesn't seem like a Seth Wallace thing to do.
No.
Yeah. There's Minnesota Dave. Dave, we just can't wait to read your super chat contribution. Thank you so much for that. 30-17 Minnesota. Wow. 30 points on the board for Minnesota in this game. How do you even pronounce this PJ Fleck? Is it?
I've always said Ski-U-Ma.
Ski-U-Ma.
Always said that.
RTB, what does that stand for? Oh,
Roll the
row the
boat.
boat. Okay. I should be up on my PJ Fleck
Yeah, you should.
acronyms because
So,
that's my guy.
my next question: where's Daniel?
We weren't able to get Daniel. Could not make it
Okay.
today.
All
I
right.
gave it a shot.
Well, we'll miss Daniel, but everybody head over to Gophers Guru for
Yeah.
information from the other side.
Yeah. I'm sure he'll have all sorts of metrics and analytics for us over there. Yeah.
So, what do you make of the Caleb Johnson explosion of yards through 3 weeks? Again, albeit against 2 of the 3 games have been against much inferior opponents.
So I'm not at practice, but Kirk's been talking up the offensive line improvement. And most of those big runs, as is the case with most 50-yard runs at a high level of college football play, were beautifully blocked. They were
Yes.
beautiful
Many
plays.
of them untouched.
Yes.
Yep.
And he is the back to take advantage of that
Mhm.
because once he gets up ahead of steam, no cornerback wants to get a hold of one
Yep.
of those thighs, number one. Number two, he's just fast.
Yes.
So
Exactly.
that it just looks beautiful. So
You're right. He fits the. So this is where I got in trouble over the first couple of weeks. I made the comment that I thought Kamari Moulton was their best all around back at the time, and I admitted that a week later I think I'm wrong on this. But Caleb Johnson was not. I mean, I know he was suspended for the first half of the Illinois State game, but even he was healthy going into Iowa State. He still shared the one line with Kamari Moulton. Now he is now the undisputed starter. Okay. He is on the one line all alone. I also think Kamari sounds like, according to Tom Caker to HawkeyeReport.com, Kamari Moulton's dealing with concussion protocol. We can talk about that because that is significant because Kirk said LaShawn Williams will not play this weekend as well. So that room all of a sudden goes from really deep to not so deep. But my point in bringing that up is I agree with you. The O-line has been so good on the ground. Now, maybe some things to clean up with the passing attack. I don't think it's been bad, but there have been some plays where I felt like Cade needed a little bit more time, especially on some play action shots down the field. Iowa State kind of throws a different looking front at you. And I thought Illinois State, I mean, I brought up how Illinois State is a team that is coached by former Purdue defensive coordinator who had all, I don't say he just took all off season, but he had unlimited amount of time to look at how to defend Iowa. And they struggled in the first half and they didn't have Caleb Johnson. And yeah, maybe Caleb not playing in the first half, made the big difference. But I think it was more so that line needed to settle in against a good game plan from the Redbirds. And Caleb has played really well. Here's what I was impressed with. And I told Liddell Betts this last week during our availability with him. I said that game against Iowa State second half was the first time I remember seeing Caleb Johnson playing through contact as well as he did and keeping those legs churning. And I thought that carried over to the Troy game. And Liddell agreed. He said, I agree with you that game. And he said, I've been preaching to Caleb about his size for a long time. And yes, it's hard to get low when you're 6'1" as a back, but he's such a physical dude. And once he figures out how to use his body consistently, not just with his speed and his long stride, but with his size and playing through contact, he's going to be a force. And so far, so good. Now, it's going to get more difficult because you're going to get better fronts, you're going to get better defenses, more physical defenses, better players, bigger players. But I agree with you, Mark. He is the perfect back for what's happening now. And you would almost think the opposite because he's such a big body. You'd want him when maybe there's not as many holes to break through, but he's not been that type of guy. He's developing into that now, it seems, but he is the fastest. And once he gets ahead of steam, you're right, hard to stop. And that offensive line is giving him an opportunity to gain that head of steam. I think his vision has improved and his confidence has got to be sky high right now because he's doing it against everybody. In every game, I'd like to look back and see how many big runs he's had through 2.5 weeks, because it seems like they actually have room for improvement. They've still had some negative run plays, but it's these 30 to 40 to 50 yard gash plays that are killing teams right now. And that's offensive line just opening up, it's like parting of the Red Sea. And you've seen it against Iowa State, and he did it again against Troy, just constantly. Even Jazz Patterson had, I know Hawkeye Howard brings up Jazz Patterson. He had a big run for a touchdown Saturday. Huge offensive line growth, and that's what we wanted. That's what we expected. And so I would guess that, hey, Ladell Betts has done a good job with all these running backs. And once Caleb Johnson leaves, they're going to be just fine. Kamari Moulton sounds like he might be in concussion protocol. Sounds like LaShawn's not going to play. We may see a heavy dose of Caleb Johnson and a guy who hadn't played until this past weekend in Jazz Patterson. And that's okay. I like both of them.
And folks, of course, we will honor Minnesota Dave's other super chat here because we don't want him to piss away his money. Minnesota Dave, how was your wedding? It sucks when you have to go to a wedding during football season. Well, I think it should be explained that it wasn't your wedding.
Yeah, it wasn't my wedding. Okay. I was in the wedding party. So it's not like it's something I couldn't get out of it. I couldn't tell. This is a friend of mine that got married. I wasn't going to, well, I can't be a part of your wedding because I have to recap the Troy game. No, that wasn't going to happen. So happy that Kyle was able to fill in admirably. But yeah, I don't like weddings in September or October. It is what it is. Beautiful wedding. Great wedding. Great cake. Lots of cake, Mark. Butter. Let's see. Butter. What was the one? Buttercream raspberry cake. There was a chocolate cake. There was a chocolate caramel. There was a vanilla. Very good. I gained some weight, let's just say, over the past week because I also went on a little fishing trip. You know, well, when you're out on a trip, Mark, you eat pizza and you drink sugary coffee and, you know, I gained a little weight.
Yeah, but you're also out walking, right? You're getting
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. Not the case. So I'll lose it. I'll get it back off.
Okay. I'm kind of doubting that actually happened. Do you weigh yourself to know that for sure?
I do weigh myself, yes.
Okay.
I had dropped about 4 pounds, and I gained 5 over the course of about a week and a half.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't want to weigh myself. Don't want to do that.
Are you still on the Oreos train? Are you still
I did have a bag of Oreos this week. I had a party-sized bag of Oreos. I dusted off.
You dusted off a party size?
Sure, I did.
Oh.
Took about 2.5 days.
Oh, my goodness.
There's about 40 cookies in there. But
40. Wow. 2.5 days you ate 40 Oreo cookies. Are they double stuff?
Yeah.
Amen.
Wow. But I haven't generally been doing that. Okay.
It's impressive stuff. That's called binging. You know that's called binge eating, Mark.
When you resist. I'll sit here working and I'll have a cold glass of milk and I'll just before I know it, I'll look at a row and be like, okay, knocked off a row. That's like 18 or 20 cookies, whatever it is. But
you do work out. That's the difference. I mean, you can get away with some of that if you're working out.
Yeah, still shouldn't do it.
Yeah. Ice cream. Ice cream.
Oh, I love ice cream.
Sure. You know what they had at the rehearsal dinner? We had a rehearsal dinner Friday. We had sirloin. We had Iowa chops. We had burgers. And then for dessert, they had all kinds of pies, including a key lime pie. And they had a berry cobbler with vanilla ice cream. Ho, ho, ho. Man, tell you what, cobbler and ice cream, Mark?
Yeah.
That's the way to go. That is the way to go. So anyways, I'm trying to kind of, I've only had about, see, I'm giving people too much information. All I've had today is a latte this morning, homemade latte, and about 320 calories for lunch. That's all I've had today. So I'll have a fairly healthy dinner and I'll probably lose weight tomorrow.
I had some clean, because that's the way my friend likes to describe it, clean cereal. I buy very clean cereal, non-processed type of cereal.
Not the Captain Crunch. You're not eating Captain Crunch.
No. I've been eating very clean cereal that he recommends. I've got a friend whose workout and diet is just, you wouldn't even recognize the stuff that he eats.
I know people like that. I can't do it.
He is strong to the hilt. But which reminds me, you got to be careful working out, Corey. You're not looking.
I saw that. My goodness. So is that
Anyway,
is that like, are those blood vessels that are
yeah, that's
exploding
not
or
from
what?
it getting hit. That's from it like rupturing.
Yikes.
So anyway, it's fine now. It's much like I could not steer my steering wheel driving home with my left. Like it was rough. Where was I? Oh, I had clean cereal. I had a ground beef. I just fried up some ground beef for lunch with some asparagus. And that's
Ooh,
what I've eaten today. And a lot of protein drinks.
that's great stuff. That is fabulous. I love asparagus. Love Brussels sprouts.
I do if they're made well, if they're made
Yep.
right, like at a restaurant, but I don't like how I make them.
So here's one of my passions. People don't know this. One of my passions is to fish, and it always has been. I love golfing. I love fishing. If you're talking about a relaxing afternoon, it's me golfing, and a relaxing morning or evening is fishing. So the reason I bring that up is not that this has anything to do with football, but if you want a really weight loss friendly diet, just use an air fryer, or grill some fresh fish. I mean, I love fish. Now, some people don't, but I've got an air fryer now, so I caught some. I had one bass, one keeper bass from fishing. It's kind of a slow week for bass. Caught some other fish, a little bit too big to keep, and so, anyways, that'll be part of my diet here. The next week is a nice bass dinner.
This is my last food comment, and I'm sure we're getting complaints in the chat. Since I have lived here, my friends take me out for a steak dinner on a fairly routine basis. Not necessarily just, oh, we have to go get steak, but I find myself ordering steak in the places we go. And because they live a very clean lifestyle, like these are pretty rare places. Like we're not going to Texas Roadhouse to get a steak. Like
What's wrong
we're
with Texas Roadhouse?
no, I'm not saying I love Texas
Yeah,
Roadhouse, but I'm saying they're not eating at a
sure,
Texas Roadhouse.
I get
Like
it.
it's got to be organic and all that sort of thing. I have eaten at this one particular place, I believe, 4 times now. The best steak I've ever had. I get the
Okay.
same steak every time now. It is phenomenal. Now it does cost $50, but it is the best steak I've ever had.
It reminds me of what I told you. Now, it's not going to be probably as clean and organic as the place you're talking about. But now the reason I want to go to Indy is to take another trip to the beef house outside of Covington, Indiana. Oh, man. You What you got to worry about is your blood sugar sky high as you're driving home, because that place just loads you up, and it's not that expensive. By the way, we've lost listeners. Can we read Maddox's? That's a very interesting first name. I was actually got a player on their roster, Maddox Borcherding Johnson, on the roster. But Maddox left a comment here for you, Mark.
Is it the final? Where is it?
No, no.
Pop it up there if you can
There you
find
go.
it. What's he telling me here?
He's giving you personal advice, weight training advice.
Mark and Corey, 6-year personal trainer here. Be sure to avoid any blood thinners before working out and try to add into some Vasilit, Vas, what
I
is
think it's
the
vasodilators.
vasodilators? I've never heard that word, like beet juice or anything with nitric oxide. Is that to improve the effectiveness of the workout or to avoid injuries? Because I have never injured myself lifting weights, but I haven't been lifting. See, I went to work out with my buddy. He calls me mid afternoon. He's like, meet me down at the Y, let's work out. He'll do that every few weeks. And again, he's way above where I am in terms of working out. But I have not lifted heavy weights on a barbell for, I mean, like 20 years. And I was fully capable of lifting these. This was like my 6th set. I'd already lifted this multiple times. I'm lifting like over 200 pounds. And just, yeah, I let it get too deep and in my it just ripped my
Ooh.
pec. Oh, it hurt. It was, yes, and you saw what it did. It was all wrapped around here, all that
Did you have someone spotting you,
scarring.
or
Yeah, he was spotting me.
because I'm guessing you couldn't get it back up when that
No,
happened?
no. I just felt, oh man, it was awful.
Wow.
Anyway, where were we headed past this? What was the next thing on my mind?
Fish,
Completing this eye with
fishing.
me.
Isaac wants to know about the best fish I caught last week. It was a slow week. Caught a, what did we say, like a 9-pound pike, which was a really good catch. threw him back, caught a 4.5-pound drum, or as some people call them, sheephead. They're actually pretty good eating, but I'm not going to keep one that's that big. Yeah, just a slow week for bass. I was not panfish. I don't really panfish very often. Although last time I took a trip, we kept about 10 bluegill. But yeah, I love if I could just fish every day, Mark, not have to worry about work.
I'm not a fisherman. I,
Some
it
people,
sounds relaxing. It looks
yeah,
relaxing. I've only done it a few times as a kid.
yeah, yeah. That's usually what that's a lot of people when I bring that. I don't like fishing. Well, why? Either they had bad experiences as a kid, or they just didn't do it as a young person, and they just kind of view it as boring. So
That's what
I
it
get
was
it.
with me. I viewed it as boring. I only did it a few times as a kid, and I didn't have like a good buddy or a father or somebody who took
Yeah,
me fishing, so it wasn't in my life.
yeah.
And a lot
You,
of good places in Ohio to fish.
you wanted to talk before we end the show. We've lost some people because of our antics, but you wanted to talk about Brennan Sullivan.
Yes. So again, we see another game slip by, and I know it was very competitive for the first half plus at, I believe, 17-14, 14-10, something in that range. And this Devontae Ross in particular, talk about explosive plays. He was the the author of three of them, three touchdowns. So he was a handful. Uh, but again, Kirk makes the decision not to go to Brendan Sullivan. Kay did play well, at least statistically, 19 of 23. Um, so
Yeah,
what are your
his number, he threw for what, 80%, which is the first time for an Iowa quarterback that's happened since I don't know how long. I think it was did Stanley do it? I can't remember, but it's been a while. His numbers were good. The eye test would say he was okay. And we got to remember this is against a Troy defense that came in ranked around 100 nationally in total defense. So this was not a great Troy defense. The Iowa rushing attack did carve it up. And so I'm not trying to take away from Cade, but I just think the verdict is still out. I've never advocated for pulling Cade since he's gone to Iowa. I've never advocated for pulling Cade. What I've advocated for was actually having Brendan in for actual snaps. Now, what we did see Saturday was Iowa bringing him in on goal line situations, which was interesting to say the least. Loved the first series of calls down near the goal line with Brendan because they bring in Brendan Sullivan. Troy calls a timeout. They bring Brennan back on the field. What does he do? He hands off to Caleb Johnson. They get down to the 2. That's smart football, right? And hey, that second, the touchdown from Brendan where he flipped the ball to Addison Estringa, good play. He may have been able to make it on with his legs, may not have. But this statement from Kirk today regarding, Tom Kakert brought up, hey, you thought about putting him in on more short yardage situations away from the goal line. He says things like, we haven't given it a lot of thought. I think we have to maybe stop reading so much into semantics with Kirk. I mean, he's disappointed fans as it relates to playing multiple quarterbacks for years, but I don't buy that. Like the fact that he said similar things over the first couple of weeks about Brendan playing at all, and then all of a sudden he's in there on every goal line situation. So I can't imagine that's true. If that is true, then that's ridiculous. If they really haven't given it a lot of thought, that you see what I'm saying, Mark? I just don't think you can. I think it's so ludicrous to think they haven't really given it much thought that I can't believe that to be true.
Well, they're doing it to a certain extent.
Well, the question though was about playing him more away from the goal line in more, hey, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1 situations. Do you bring him in? And I don't even know that I agree with that. Not to say Tom was endorsing that idea, but I think get him in for a series here or there or a play here or there. I don't think you have to. I know about rhythm. We all talk about rhythm, especially with quarterbacks, running backs, etc. I just think bringing him in away from the goal line. Hey, if K goes down, how long have we been talking about this? If he goes down, Brendan is the guy the rest of the season. And so far, they haven't given him any meaningful snaps. And to me, it just makes no sense not to do so. But Troy was kind of the last chance we had to see that. And so I don't know how we walk away from that game sort of disappointed that we didn't see him play more. But at the same time, we saw him play in a couple of meaningful snaps for the first time this season. It wasn't garbage time. They were goal line situations. It was a schematic change So I give credit to Tim Lester and give credit to Kirk Ferentz because ultimately that has to go through him. I do think Iowa will have everything ready in the playbook for Minnesota. I think this is not that they wouldn't have everything ready against Iowa State, but it's the second game of the season. This is a Minnesota game you have to think Kirk really wants. And I think back to recent years. I think back to 2018. Iowa ran at least one trick play. I believe that was the game where the long snapper tossed it to TJ Hawkinson and he went end around for a touchdown. Maybe we see a fake play this weekend. Maybe we see some trickeration. I don't know, but hey, I like Tim Lester and LeVar Woods as it relates to innovation, but Kirk's got to be willing to accept that, and maybe that involves Brendan Sullivan. It was good to see him in there. I just wish we'd see him on more, not necessarily short yardage situations, but just every down and distance type of situations.
Because the same coach who was telling us, Kirk Ferentz, who was telling us that, and this came up again today, it's taken Cade McNamara apparently a long, long time, and he's still not back to where he was at Michigan because he suffered through injuries, didn't play, still played almost 4 games last year, that he's not yet. He's still just getting back to where he was. Well, I understand that's from an injury standpoint as well, but it also has to do with rust because he has been healthy since when? At least since the spring or late spring or into the summer, healthy enough to compete for the job, win the job, and now play 3 games. Apply that same logic to Brendan Sullivan. If Cade McNamara does get hurt at some point in the season and Sullivan's been on the shelf and never played a meaningful down for this football team with these players, aside from Jacob Gill, then you've put yourself in a situation where your quarterback is going to be rusty and out of sync, most likely.
And let me give you some parting thoughts on this. We brought it up at the outset. This, by all accounts, so far, and historically for the most part, is a solid Minnesota DB room. So they are going to challenge Iowa. Troy did not. Okay. And I guess that's what I'm saying. I didn't think Cade looked great in spite of his good numbers. There were a couple of plays, like one that was outstretched catch by Jacob Gill. That guy catches everything anywhere close to him. It's such an opposite to what we saw under Kelton Copeland and Brian Ferentz. Those guys watch. He catches everything near him. Jarrett Bowie had a nice catch. Caden Weegan had a nice catch. So Terrell Washington had a nice catch. I think the receivers helped Cade's numbers, and that Troy defense helped Cade's numbers. Now, this week, Minnesota is going to challenge him. And so if Cade is against good Power 4 competition, if he's the quarterback we saw against the only Power 4 opponent on the schedule to this point, that will shine through, I believe, this Saturday. And we may see Brendan. I maybe wishful thinking, but the fact that he came in for any meaningful snaps at all, if he comes out against their second Power 4 opponent and picks up where he left off in the fourth quarter against Iowa State, then I'd be advocating for Brendan. Not necessarily you yank Cade permanently, but giving him some snaps. Now, I think it's a possibility because I think it's logical. That doesn't mean Kirk agrees with it. But very intriguing game on so many levels, and having it as a night game, I'll probably be doing a post-game show until 1. It's going to be a fun one. And again, how many times are we going to have to watch that highlight of Cooper DeJean and the illegal signal and all that nonsense this weekend?
Well, the networks want to play up a narrative, and that's the best one to go to in this matchup. But it is for the Floyd of Rosedale, and a traditional matchup in which Iowa has owned the series convincingly in recent times, certainly 8 of 9, and that includes the botched call last year even. They're a 2.5-point favorite at Minnesota. Look at that over-under. I forgot to put it up there, 36. So Iowa continues to post those kind of over-unders. But, hey, they broke through it last week with 59 combined points.
What was the over-under for the Illinois State game? Do you know? I think they've hit the over on every game this year, haven't they?
I believe so.
So it's like, yeah, not to say that Iowa's some juggernaut now, but who cares what the over-under is because Iowa keeps hitting the over.
Yeah.
We'll see if they do that in Big Ten play. But, hey, they scored 40 against Illinois State, scored 38 this past week, and, 20 wasn't great again. Had 13 points. I can't. That game is just, that will always be the thorn in Iowa's side if they don't make the playoffs. The fact that they
Yeah.
found a way to lose that game, unbelievable.
And we were kicking around the Big Ten at the outset of the show. Just one more quick note, since we won't likely speak, at least on air, there's a nice little game going on in the Big Ten Friday night as part of this Fox Friday night, mostly Big Ten matchups. Nebraska, Illinois.
Illinois has looked surprisingly good. And there's another team. I mean, both those teams can't win this weekend, but those are a couple teams on the Iowa schedule that, I think Illinois is on the Iowa schedule, aren't they? Or are they not now? I'm trying to remember. Michigan State, Washington, Northwestern, Nebraska, Maryland, Ohio State, Minnesota. I'm at 7. Who am I missing?
Good question.
Wisconsin, that's 8.
No Illinois.
No Illinois. Who's 9?
In order: Minnesota, Ohio State, Washington, Michigan State, Northwestern, Wisconsin, UCLA, Maryland,
UCLA.
Nebraska.
Okay. UCLA. All right.
No
So
Illinois.
if I'm Iowa, I like Brett Bielema. Root for the Huskers. I know that's painful for Iowa fans, but I think you want Nebraska to win as much as possible. If you want to, some people are just, like I say, they're just turned off by any playoff conversation. But if you want Iowa to have any chance at 10-2 to make the playoffs, you need that Nebraska game as a marquee win. And the only way that happens is if Nebraska keeps winning.
Illinois has already beaten what is supposed to be one of the best teams in the Big 12, Kansas. Yeah. And then their other 2 wins were not against good teams, but where Illinois has typically struggled against the FAUs and the MAC schools, they just took care of business, blew them both out. So
and impressive
start for Brett Bielema.
The Big Ten has found a way on a couple of games to lose games they shouldn't have lost. Northwestern should have beaten Duke. Iowa should have beaten Iowa State. And I'm not just talking about, I think one team's better than the other, but the way the games played out, if you watch those games, Northwestern should have. What's that?
Minnesota, Northwestern.
North Carolina, you mean?
North Carolina.
Yeah. There's 3 games right there. And then you have the beatdown that Wisconsin was handed over the weekend. So I don't know. I know it's Alabama, but still, to do that on the road, impressive stuff.
Yeah. All right. You can catch the audio version of not only this show, but all of Corey's work. Good sampling of it on From the Hawkeye of the Storm on your favorite audio platform. Of course, join Corey for the post game and tons of great content there at From the Hawkeye of the Storm. Be back here next Tuesday. We'll talk the Minnesota game and look ahead, of course, at the Big Ten schedule right here at the Voice of College Football. We will see you next time. And remember, Nebraska Live's coming up in a half hour on the Nebraska channel.